Hi, I'm Omid from Phoenix English, and this lesson is about stative verbs. Today I'll explain what stative verbs are, how to use them, and how not to use them. Specifically, we'll be looking at 12 important stative verbs, and I'll show you how to stop making mistakes with those commonly used verbs and how to start using them correctly and confidently. Okay? So let's get started. Alright, so first of all, when we are talking about verbs in English, there are many ways to classify them. You probably know some of these already. Like, for example, we talk about verbs as being regular and irregular, or transitive and intransitive. And today, what we'll be looking at is the fact that verbs are also divided according to whether they are dynamic or stative. Okay? Now, what does that mean? Most verbs in English are what we call dynamic. That means that they refer to actions, alright? But stative verbs refer to states or conditions. So, let's look at the differences. The dynamic verbs refer to actions. For example, run, or play, or work and learn, or eat and drink, right? These are actions. And what's important with these dynamic verbs, which are most of the verbs in English, is that we can use them in all the tenses. That means we can use them in the simple tenses, we can use them in the continuous tenses, or we can use them with the perfect tenses. Alright? So, these verbs you can use in all of the wonderful tenses of English that you know. For example, I could say I work, or I worked, I am working, or I was working, or I have worked, or I have been working. Right? I can use it in the simple tense or the continuous tense. No problem. But what happens when we get to the stative verbs, and this is the main mistake that people make, is that because it refers to a state or condition, we cannot use it with all the tenses. We can only use these verbs in anything but the continuous. So we can use it with the simple tense or with the perfect tense, but not in a continuous form. Okay? Let me give you the examples. So examples of a stative verb is know. I know. I understand. I believe. I can say that. But I should not be saying and cannot say in correct English, I am knowing. Okay, no continuous forms. And this is where the majority of mistakes are made. Because first of all, in many languages, there are no different verb tenses. There is no simple and continuous at all. So there is only one present tense, for example, or one past tense. And that's what causes the difficulty sometimes in English between these simple tenses and continuous tenses. And especially in this section, because these stative verbs are never allowed to be used in a continuous form. Okay? And I'm going to make your life easier because I'm today just focusing on these stative verbs and we can never use in the continuous form. So, now these are the ones. Look at some examples of what we can say with them. We can say, for example, I know, I knew, I have known, I had known. Simple past perfect tenses here, but no continuous tenses. Alright? Now, just for you to know, there are also some verbs, not too many, a few, which are a little bit more difficult. Why? Because those verbs can sometimes be used in a dynamic way, and then we can use them with all the tenses, and sometimes they can be used in a stative way, and therefore we cannot use them in the continuous. And these are sort of the most difficult ones of the lot. We're not going to talk about them today, that's another lesson. Okay, so you have to pay special attention to these, which could be used both ways. But today I'm gonna make your life very easy because we're just gonna focus on the 12 stative verbs, not the 12, but 12 out of many which we can only use in the stative form. Okay, so let's look at what those verbs are. Okay, so One thing I want to mention is if you look up this subject in a standard grammar textbook or even online, usually they just divide these verbs into two, dynamic and stative. But the problem is, then under the stative, they mix up the ones which are always stative and the ones which are sometimes stative and sometimes dynamic. And that's why I separated them into three categories. The verbs which are always dynamic, the verbs which are always stative, and a few verbs which we didn't cover and we are not going to cover in this lesson, but which you know that there are some that can sometimes be stative and sometimes be dynamic. Now let's look at 12 plus two bonus verbs that are never used in the continuous form. So in case you're using them that way, it's not going to happen anymore. So I've written all the stative verbs in white. Let's give an example. I love chocolate, but not I'm loving. Now, I'm not going to say the wrong one for you. I'm just going to say the right one. Alright, so you can hear and repeat after me the correct form. Okay? I love chocolate. The next one. I like that show. You can say it after me. I'm gonna say I before all of these. Okay? Ready? I hate cleaning. That's not true, but maybe some people don't like cleaning. I need a ride. Okay? Not the continuous form. I know her. I understand French. No continuous here. And an extra one. I own a car. Next, let's look at some other verbs. These are the very common words, right? Love, like, hate, need, know, understand, own. Very common words. But now let's look at some other words and slightly more advanced words, but also words which are very commonly used. For example, we should say, I appreciate your offer. Or, I prefer Chinese food. Repeat it after me because one way of learning is not just to read it and not just to hear it, but also to hear yourself saying it and to say it yourself so your mouth gets used to saying the right thing. Okay? Next, I dislike horror movies. I believe you. I realize I was wrong. What does it mean to realize something? It's like to suddenly understand, to understand that something is true. I realize I was wrong, not the continuous form. No continuous forms with any of these stative verbs. Right. I recognize him. What does it mean to recognize someone? To be able to identify that that is that person. I recognize him. Or it can even also recognize a thing. I recognize that backpack. I think it's his. Okay? To identify that something belongs to someone or that somebody is someone. And the last one here, I belong to that club. And again, belong in this context means it means I'm a member. I'm a member of that club. All right? So let's say these again. I appreciate. I prefer. I dislike. I believe. I realize. I recognize. I belong. Okay? So you have just learned 14 stative verbs that you will always, from now on, never use in a continuous form. You can use them in the simple form. That means you can use them in the present or the past. And you can also use them in the perfect form. Like, for example, I have done something or I had done something. What you can do is choose one of these words that maybe in the past you were making a mistake and leave a comment for us. And also, if you enjoyed my video, please subscribe and share. Now that you know this rule, if you hear any of your friends speaking this way or writing this way, do them a favor, alright? Point it out to them. Tell them to watch the video so they understand too. And then you and your friends can be speaking and writing more correctly. Thanks very much for watching. Bye for now and all the best with your English.